Welcome to Heart and Soul PR. I'm your host, Jimmy Borges. Today's video is about a book review, or better yet, a book recommendation. And I was born and raised in Newark, New Jersey in 1958. So I have a few decades behind me. But the reason why I bring that up is because I grew up in the public school system during the 60s and 70s. And during that time, you learn about U.S. history. And I love history. I love studying history. But during that time, Puerto Rico was not mentioned once. And from the time I started kindergarten to the time I graduated high school, Puerto Rico was never mentioned in U.S. history. And if it was so brief that I don't remember it at all. And so my parents are Puerto Rican, and I remember in the 60s, growing up in Newark at that time, Newark is broken down into wards. You have north, south, east, west wards, and then you have your central ward. And Puerto Ricans at that time, the majority of Puerto Ricans lived in the north and east ward, where most of my family, cousins and uncles and stuff, were living in the city's north ward. But we lived in the south and west ward primarily, and a short time in the central ward. And during that time, growing up, the neighborhoods were predominantly African American. So there were Puerto Ricans throughout the city, but not in a large population, mostly in the north ward. So the Puerto Rican friends that I had in the south and west ward were just a few families. Maybe I had 3 or 4 friends that were Puerto Rican, but the rest of my friends primarily were African American. So learning about my history was rare, and even though I grew up not learning Spanish, which I'll get to in a second, I still had a curiosity about Puerto Rico. I'm Puerto Rican, what does that mean as a kid? So most of my family were bilingual. They spoke Spanish and English. Most of my Puerto Rican friends in school were bilingual. There were a couple that spoke primarily English, and I guess Spanish was something that they rarely spoke but knew. And so I felt at a disadvantage when I was around family and my Puerto Rican friends, that because I didn't speak Spanish. And I always wondered why that was so. And I remember growing up in my household, my parents would speak Spanish to each other, mostly when we weren't engaged with them. But when they spoke with me, they always spoke English. And growing up until I was 9, I was the only child. And then my younger brother was born. And so my curiosity would cause me to ask my parents questions about Puerto Rico. I've never been to the island. The first time I went to Puerto Rico, I was in my 30s. So during the 60s, my father would talk about certain historical figures, like Don Pedro Albizu Campos. He was a revolutionary hero of his time, and still today, his history transcends his death. And Lolita LeBron, different Puerto Rican celebrities during the 60s and 70s. So I really didn't learn much about my history, about the history of Puerto Rico. I would ask questions about my father and my mother, about where they grew up and where they lived and what their childhood was like. And I always thought that my father and my mother came to the U.S. as adults. But, I later learned that my father came to the U.S. when he was 6. So the U.S. was pretty much all he really knew. He vaguely remembers his childhood. And my mother, she came to the U.S. in her early teens. So, by the time, I was asking these questions, they were well into adulthood, and their memory primarily was faint. And so I didn't learn much history of Puerto Rico from my parents. I didn't learn any of it in school. So it wasn't until I became an adult and after visiting Puerto Rico in my 30s that I felt that I needed to know more, you know. So, you know, I retired. I was a firefighter in Irvington, New Jersey. I retired in 2017, and I moved to Puerto Rico. I was here. We moved here in June of 2017, but unfortunately, we had Hurricane Maria later that year in September, and it forced us to move back to the States. But after living in the States for a couple of years, we were missing Puerto Rico again. So in 2022, we moved back to Puerto Rico, bought a home here, and it gives me a different perspective and a different desire to learn, you know, Puerto Rican history. So that's why this channel is to promote Puerto Rican culture, Puerto Rico history. So I started off, you know, reading numerous books on Puerto Rico. And doing my search for Puerto Rican history, you know, I decided to read a book titled The War Against All Puerto Ricans by Nelson A. Dennis. And it was the title that drew me to this book first. There are hundreds of books on Puerto Rican history and historical figures, but that title really connected with me. I'm a retired Army vet, served 23 years in the military, and the war against all Puerto Ricans, that's a powerful statement. You know, it's a powerful title. So I said, that's the book I want to read first. So I did, and it was captivating. It grabbed me from the very beginning to the last word of the book. And I recommend this book because it taught me a lot about the political struggle that Puerto Ricans went through after winning its independence from Spain in, I believe, 1897, and then being conquered again by the U.S. immediately in 1898. So Puerto Ricans never had freedom, never. And even though in, I think it was 1917, the U.S. granted Puerto Ricans born in the island citizenship, it was not to the benefit of Puerto Ricans, but to the benefit of the U.S. because they needed bodies to fight in the war. So the book, The War Against All Puerto Ricans, takes you from 1898 pretty much to current day. And even though we were granted U.S. citizenship, we are not treated equal as Americans. We are not. And the struggle for independence during the last 100 or so years is a constant struggle. Puerto Rico has been abused, has been taken advantage of because of this current status. We're a territory of the U.S. We're a colony of the U.S., one of the oldest colonies in the world. We're American citizens, but we're not Americans. We don't have the same rights as Americans. We can't vote in federal elections. We don't have senators that go and vote on our behalf in Congress. And since 1898, Puerto Rico has been truly abused and taken advantage of. And the book documents all of the struggles and all the abuses over the last 100 or so years. So, you know, the book is very powerful, especially for me, having never learned my history. And this is the first book of many. And so I feel for people who were in my position, who grew up outside of Puerto Rico, of Puerto Rican heritage, never having the opportunity to learn Puerto Rican history in the States for whatever reason, and my parents not really having the full knowledge themselves because they came to the States at a very young age. We need to take the initiative to learn as much as we can about our history as possible. And I would say there's several books that I've read over the past 2 years living here on the island. And there's several books that I can easily recommend, but start somewhere. So that somewhere for me was this book, The War Against All Puerto Ricans by Nelson A. Dennis. And then next month, I'll talk about other books that I feel that should be a part of your library. I'm proud to be Puerto Rican. And if you ask any Puerto Rican, no matter whether they're on the island or in the States or in another country, they're proud. They're proud of their heritage. They're proud of their culture. They're proud of their struggle. And we wear tattoos. We fly our flags just as equally as, many Puerto Ricans fly the American flag. But when you learn your history, it galvanizes that pride. I'm proud to be Puerto Rican, even without knowing my history. But once you start learning your history, it instills a fire in you to know more. And it angers you, and there's nothing wrong with that anger because it makes you fight for rights that you are not given and rights that you deserve. And if you're going to call me an American citizen so that I can fight in your wars and defend the U.S., then we should fight for, our rights that are equal to other American citizens in the 50 states. When you look at politics in the U.S., it's horrible. It's horrible how, the hatred between Americans, between each other over politics. Vote for who you want. That's your right. But if your man loses or my man wins, it doesn't matter. The next go around, the next 2 years, the next 4 years, you vote for who you want to vote for. And the majority, whoever that person gets those votes, wins. And you live with it. But here in Puerto Rico, it's different. It's not Republican versus Democrat. The issues are different. Here the issue is the status of the island. And it can get nasty too, which I find bizarre. But it's either you have people fighting for statehood, which they've been promised for over 100 years, or you have the people who are fighting to keep it the Commonwealth, the current status, which does not benefit us at all because we get deeper in debt, we lose our autonomy, we lose our land, we lose our rights under the current status, and I don't understand how people can, want to keep that, and we lose our pensions, we lose our hospitals, we lose our doctors, we lose our college graduates, we lose our schools. Schools, over 400 schools have closed, over the last decade, and that's because of the current status. There's no benefit to the island, and being here and seeing this, you realize something's wrong, and that's the current, territorial status, as a commonwealth, or not a commonwealth, a colony. And they want to call it we're a territory, but we're a colony of the U.S. And then you have the battle for those who want independence. And independence people who are fighting for that have been fighting for decades, since the beginning, since 1898, have been fighting for Puerto Rican independence. And they're still fighting. And what I'm learning is that the people who are fighting for independence are being attacked for that point of view. People think it's safe for the current status as a commonwealth, but if you look around and you see where Puerto Rico is headed with its debt, with its loss of teachers and closings of schools, and losing its, sovereignty, it can't sustain itself. And statehood has just been a carrot that's been dangled in front of the Puerto Rican population for over 100 years. If the U.S. wanted Puerto Rico to be a state, it would have been a state. So then you look at the other option, which is sovereignty. And it's very intriguing. And the more I read about Puerto Rican history and the people and the strength of its people, the more I believe that maybe that's an option that we should not be afraid of. And, I really think that if you're Puerto Rican, whether you're here in the country or whether you're in the diaspora in the U.S. or around the world, learn your history, read your history, because it opens up your mind to different possibilities, and not just settle for the status quo, which is, remaining a U.S. colony. And so it's either you fight for statehood or you fight for independence. But the current status of Puerto Rico as a colony of the U.S. cannot maintain itself. And we are going to lose our country. We're going to lose the land and our rights as Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico. So that's my point of view. That's my perspective. But you have to be aware of your history. Whether you ever come to live in Puerto Rico or not, it's your country. It is. Just like an Italian, a German American, Italian American, a Haitian American, whatever country your family originates from, you should still have pride in that origin. And, and that's okay. You have that right. And you deserve that right. But Puerto Ricans also should show that pride. And they do. If you go to the States and you see a Puerto Rican, he's proud to be Puerto Rican. He's wearing a hat. He's got a tattoo. They're marching in their parades. They are proud, no matter whether they ever came to the island or not. They know who they are. And but know your history. Speaking Spanish, that was my one regret, not learning the language. I'm studying now, and it's hard, but I'm learning a lot more than I've ever had. But one thing I do know is I'm learning my history, and it makes me a desire to learn more and more, and to be more proactive in the future of Puerto Rico. And I hope that this message gets across to you. So if you haven't read anything on Puerto Rican history, or haven't sat down with anyone who talks about their experiences of living in Puerto Rico, then start with one book. The first book I recommend is The War Against All Puerto Ricans. It really opens up your eyes to the past and makes you really want to desire to know more. And there's so many authors out there, so many great authors. And I found also there's a website on Facebook that I found, and it's called 787 Libros. 787 is the area code of Puerto Rico, and Libros is the Spanish term for books. And it's an online website to purchase books on Puerto Rican history, or Puerto Rican authors and stories, and it's a whole bookstore online. And check it out, and look at the titles, and most of them are in Spanish. So, but I'm sure you can go online to Amazon and probably find many of these titles, maybe that have been translated. So start now, get your first book, learn your history, not just the language, learn your history, and really see the importance of Puerto Rico being not just a commonwealth, whether we're going to be a state or whether we're going to be an independent sovereign nation. Those are the only two choices, in my opinion. So I wish you all a great study. Please, if this video inspires you to learn more about your culture, like, subscribe, share this video, and I wish you, as always, a great day. Take care.